Hola, minasan! Welcome back for another round of Warhammer research. We're not gonna go into great details on the last show. I said what I said. What's done is done. Today we're moving on with people recommended Book Rule 65. Arbiter Ian. We're heading back into Arbiter Ian. Every edition of Warhammer 40k in 16 minutes. Again, I'm still on that quest to understand why, try to understand and process and learn and understand the thought process, the reasoning behind the Necron retcon. However, I feel like I'm running at an end here in terms of trying to find that information and why people hate Matt Ward a lot. Why Matt Ward is hated a lot. What was the reasoning behind it? It looks like these answers, these may never get answered properly, which really stinks. But I do want to finish up the Necron research on the next go. I want to hear about the Orc War versus the Necrons. Go Orcs! So, we're back to Arbitor Ian with this one. Every edition of Warhammer 40k in 16 minutes. Links are down in the description below. Show your support. Arbitor Ian is very good. He has not led me astray. So grab your notes together for my post-research thoughts. This is a call to action. Comment, like, subscribe, follow, hit the notification button, and let us begin the research.
Hi gang, so occasionally I make a video and then I realise that I might have assumed everyone knew a load of stuff I already know, and then I go and make a note to make a video to explain the video I've already made, and yeah, anyway, I've been meaning to do this for a while. Warhammer 40k has been around since 1987, and in that time it's had 9 different editions. I constantly refer to all of them in all of my videos, but what was the actual difference? What came in the box? What were data faxes? When was the red period? When did plastic models become a thing? Who and why Grimdark? So in this video, I'm going to go through a brief history of every edition and point out the important bits.
All right.
Warhammer 40,000 First Edition was released in 1987 as a single hardback book of game rules, entitled Rogue Trader and written by Rick Priestley. It had no starter set or boxed armies, just a set of rules for playing the game, for generating characters and warbands, and with some background about this brand new setting. Any additional rules were published in White Dwarf magazine, including the very first army lists, and over the life of First Edition, these articles were collected together in compilation books. In addition, there were a few big books that were released that concentrated on various factions, like the Realms of Chaos books or the Orc books, but mostly it was White Dwarf. Models at the time were almost all single-part metal models made from lead, although they'd switch over to pewter within a few years.
Yes.
There were a few multi-part plastic sets for Orcs, Space Marines, Imperial Guard and Squats, and a couple of plastic vehicles, but pretty much everything else was metal. The game itself was scaled for armies of maybe 20 to 40 models and the odd vehicle, and featured a lot of characterful but complicated rules, more like a role-playing game of the time than a streamlined
Yeah, I was going to say,
it was recommended that you use
like
games
Dungeons and
masters
Dragons
or referees who would come up with scenarios and run all the wild animals and civilians and stuff. But while it was hardly the mass market game we know today, it was really popular, and Games Workshop would release hundreds of models over its 6-year lifespan. And that's our starting point, but the game becomes a lot more recognisable with the release in 1993 of the second edition. Look at this! Look at all the colours!
Wow!
Second edition 40k was written by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, and it was released as a box starter set, which included all the rulebooks, 2 armies, dice, and some cardboard scenery. To start your 40k journey, you got 20 plastic Orc Goths, 20 plastic Gretchen, 2 plastic tactical squads, and this fantastic, and I'm pretty sure still tournament legal, cardboard Orc Dragon.
That looks
also, there was
awesome.
no separate rulebook. If you wanted to play 40k, you needed to buy this box. This, along with Warhammer Fantasy 4th Edition, was the start of Games Workshop's Red period, where models were painted only in bright primary colours and bases were only and always Goblin Green. It was an obvious shift from the more adult-oriented Rogue Trader to a box product aimed squarely at kids. I remember this being about 40 quid when I was a kid, just in the perfect Christmas present bracket. Models at the time were still mostly metal, shifting to something called white metal in 1997, but each army tended to have a single monopose plastic box set of whatever the most core troop type was. Sergeants and special weapons would still come as metal models in blister packs. Space Marines, as always, were the exception here, with a full tactical squad with 3 sculpts. Also, something that had started in Rogue Trader continued through 2nd edition. That was the trend of releasing metal bodies with a separate sprue of arms and weapons made in plastic. The rules were a complete reset, so the box included Get You By Army List supplements, and soon after we get the very first Codex books. Because of this Codex-based updating, the number of factions was reduced, and loads of smaller factions never made it any further than Rogue Trader. The rules here were broadly the same as Warhammer Fantasy Battle of the same era, simplified from Rogue Trader, but still complex by today's standards. Weapons had range modifiers, which you only see in skirmish games now. Each special unit or weapon tended to have its own entire page of rules and templates. Oh yeah, templates. There was a lot of cardboard in this edition, from custom templates to data faxes for vehicles, with custom tables for damage, and war gear cards like magic item cards in Warhammer. This was also the edition of Hero Hammer. Many armies would just be like a couple of squads of the core plastic set, and then a load of ridiculously tooled up characters. Totally understandable when you think of the people buying it. Blister packs were a lot easier to buy with your pocket money than metal box sets. 2nd edition continued for much of the 90s until the release of 3rd edition in 1998. 3rd edition was written by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, with Gav Thorpe, Ian Pickstock and Jervis Johnson, and it was released as a softback rulebook with an accompanying box set, as we're kind of used to nowadays. The box set had, as well as the rulebook, plastic terrain and trees, a single Space Marine tactical squad and plastic land speeder, and 20 all-new Dark Eldar Cabalite warriors. They're all multi-part, but there's less of them than last time. Not sure if that's better or worse. Anyway, this was the introduction of Dark Eldar to the game.
I'm very curious why they do that.
Through the rest of the edition, Tau and Necrons would be introduced too. I mean, Necrons had a few models in 2nd edition, but 3rd edition was when they'd turn into a full army. The rules were much simpler than 2nd edition. Note how little cardboard there is in this. The big change was the idea of categorizing units and weapons into different types, and moving the rules mostly into how the different unit and weapon types interacted with each other. This had the effect of making individual unit rules really streamlined. Codexes in 3rd edition were way smaller, but the core rules became a lot more complex. 40k stuck with this set of rules for the next 4 editions, adding more and more types and categories until it became, well, a mess, but I've got a whole video on that, so let's not go over it again. In short, 3rd edition was a streamlined set of rules which put the focus firmly back on troops and tactics instead of characters and upgrades. As noted from the cover art, recently reproduced for 9th edition, the general tone shifted a bit darker and edgier. This is really the edition where grimdark became a thing. You can tell by the way the box set had their Marines painted as Black Templars, the discerning edgelord Space Marine chapter. Despite the codexes being much smaller, 3rd edition had a massive increase in background material. This was the era when Black Library took off. Games Workshop started publishing comic books or background and art books. So this is when it started expanding. A lot of these things have been tried before a bit, but this was the era they really became main parts of Games Workshop's production, along with regular video games and merchandise. The big innovation in models around the time was the return of multi-part plastic kits. It was happening in Fantasy 2 with mixed results. During 3rd edition, we got multi-part plastic kits. I don't know, those don't look really good. Pretty much every army. Special units were still metal or metal plastic hybrids. As well as the new armies mentioned earlier, we got the first of what would now be called Codex supplements, variant rules and army lists for existing codexes, at least one of which was in the form of a campaign supplement for the Eye of Terror campaign.
Ooh, look at that.
3rd edition ran for 6 years, and in 2004 it was replaced by 4th edition, which...
Okay. Before we get on with 4th edition, I got a question to ask, and I need to know. Let me see if I can find it here. Let's see if I can find it. This little packaging. Here we go. Are they still, right here on the top left, this individual character package, are they still selling them like this, Games Workshop or any other store for that matter? If I were to go to like a game store that sells Warhammer, are these still being sold today, these individual ones? I'm sure they're probably a little on expensive side, probably like $5. Probably standard, figurine costs like $5-6 maybe. But what I'm asking is if this is available, and how many of these would I need in order to play a Warhammer game? To do one Warhammer game. Like, is 5 minimum good enough? to do a basic short game, pickup game. Because if that's the case, I wouldn't mind, at the very least, grabbing one of these small ones, saying, and just get a small team out of it. At the very least, as opposed to spending $50 for a whole big kit that might not even see gameplay. But at the very least, if I were to go to a convention and I happen to have, the proper amount, the minimum amount to do a Warhammer game, and I could, I could try out if they're willing to teach me how, if they're willing to walk me through the whole game and everything, and I could just play with the 5 that I got, whatever the minimum number is. You know what I'm saying? Let me know. Let me know if that's still there. If that's still on sale, and how many would I need to be able to do a game, to do a pickup game, like a short campaign.
Third edition ran for 6 years, and in 2004 it was replaced by 4th edition, which was released as a hardback book and the first name starter set, Battle Former Crag. So this time we have Ultramarines versus Tyranids. The Tyranids get 10 Termagants and 6 Gene Stealers, and the Space Marines just get 1 tactical squad. But there is this crash shuttle and pilot in plastic to make up for it, and a mini rulebook. The rules are listed as being written by Andy Chambers, Pete Haynes, Jervis Johnson and Rick Priestley. And
that's
they're
a lot.
Less of a shift than
Rick Priestley and Andy
before.
Chambers.
The rules were basically a consolidated version of 3rd edition, with some of the various similar abilities moved into the core rule set. 3rd edition codexes were still compatible, which meant fewer codices were released in 4th edition. Some armies just used their 3rd edition one all the way through, which wasn't great, but on the other hand, 3rd edition had been around for so long that some of these were actually 3.5 codexes. The second codex
like
an army
D&D
received in 3rd
3.5.
edition, and written a little more with 4th in mind. A lot of the codexes in this edition introduced a doctrine system of some sort, where you could tailor your army to be from a specific planet or chapter, and with things like the Index Astartes books introducing even more variant lists, by the end of 4th edition there were a ton of different variant armies you could take. The art stayed grimdark, but a bit less medieval. There was more colour, more Renaissance than the 3rd edition stuff, and the edition stayed around for a pretty standard 4 years until the release of 5th edition in 2008. The format here was exactly the same as 4th, a hardback book and a box set with a name. This one was Assault on Black Reach, featuring Dark Angels and Orcs, but look at this, way more than previous sets. The Dark Angels got 1 captain, 10 tactical marines, 5 terminators and a dreadnought. And the Orcs got a war boss, 20 boys, 5 knobs.
Oh, that's
and 3
cool.
Orc
A war
Death Doctors,
boss.
which for most of the time they existed were only available in this set. It also came with a mini rulebook. This time it's listed as being written by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, with Alessio Cavatore, Pete Haynes, Anthony Reynolds, Jervis Johnson and Adam Troke, which is all the people who wrote 4th and a couple more. And yeah, that checks out.
I noticed the
4th
increase
edition
in
was
writers.
even more folded in. Again, old codices remain valid, so in the lifespan of this edition, only about half the factions received new books. Most of the ones left over from 3rd edition were updated, though some had to get by with White Dwarf articles, which people didn't like. Despite the fact that 3rd edition rules were technically still usable in 5th edition, I'd say this is probably the last version of the game before the expansion of rules started to get really silly and almost impossible to keep up with. By this point, armies had a range of plastic kits and vehicles, with only character models and specialists or old releases still hanging around in metal. But during 5th edition, we saw the introduction of Finecast, a sort of resin material, and a lot of the old metal sculpts started to be replaced by the same model, but in Finecast. It didn't go down that well at the start. There were like air bubbles and bendy bits and stuff, but it kind of leveled out over time. There are still people around who hate Finecast, but it's basically no different to buying a Forge World model at this point. 6th edition was released in 2012. This time it was written by Adam Troke, Jeremy Vitok and Matt Ward. A lot of the big names, including Rick Priestley, missing for the first time. This was the shortest edition. It was only around for 2 years, and a lot was released in that time. Games Workshop really embraced the possibility of digital codices for the first time and just went crazy. The starter set was Dark Vengeance, Dark Angels versus
The box
Chaos.
is so
20 cultists, Chaos Space Marine Chosen,
washed
a Chaos
over.
Lord and a Hellbrute, and they would play against a tactical squad, 3 bikers, 3 terminators, a librarian and a captain, and the set came with the normal mini rulebook. The models here all shifted to multi-part plastics with fine cast characters. Some metal was still available, but not that much. Also, this was the advent of push-fit models. The whole of this starter set was push-fit and an obvious jump into 3D design. As I said, there were tons of rules released. It was again an updating of 5th edition, but this time we had loads of expansions and campaign books. Stronghold Assault gave us fortifications, Planet Strike, different ways to play, Escalation introduced super heavies and flyers into the game, and there were all these data slates and data sheets floating around for minor factions which were used as upgrades. Also, codex supplements were introduced again. First time we'd seen those since 3rd edition, really.
Wow.
The thing changed to the rule here was formations. This was a new way of building an army that gave you extra special rules if you introduced multiples of the same kit. They were considered interesting to start off with, but they soon went downhill. We also saw the first new faction for a while. Imperial Knights were released then, coinciding with the rules introduction of super heavies and loads of really big models for each faction. Anyway, it didn't last long. There was a lot released, and the whole game shifted very quickly into 7th edition in 20.
Yeah. I noticed that as the editions moved along, more and more writers were getting involved until the 6th edition happened, which only lasted 2 years. That's this is the first time Matt Ward's name comes up. So apparently, I guess that's when the ship. When did the? Yeah, it was what 6th edition that whole shift with the Necron started happening. The whole retcon issue. I mean, 2 years is very short for an edition. Like, not enough time. There wasn't really enough time. I also like the fact that after 3rd edition, each edition was still compatible with 3rd edition. I thought that was pretty cool. And the sets got more and more elaborate. I like how they were evolving the models and such. But I find it very fascinating that the number of writers started increasing, but then at 6th edition it shrunk down. And I really don't like the way 6th edition looked. It was just black boxes. It was so drab, and there's like compared to the previous editions, yeah, it just wasn't. It just didn't look exciting. Didn't look appealing at all.
14. This is also when they stopped putting author names on everything, so this is by Games Workshop. The rules for 7th edition were released as this lovely 3-book box, giving you background, model tips, and, the rules themselves, but the starter kit for this was still Dark Vengeance. It had only been out for 2 years after all, and the models in it were, well, really nice. Generally,
a lot of the aesthetics is going away here.
Quite familiar. Models had started to be packaged in the familiar form we have today, plastic box sets that do 2 similar versions of a unit. Plus, there were plastic character boxes. Some characters were still in fine cast, but plastic seemed to be the way forward from now on. In 7th edition, most main factions got a codex, more codex supplements were released, and these eventually just became mini codexes. Adeptus Mechanicus, Harlequins, Genestealer cults, and Deathwatch were turned into full armies with their own codices, and Custodes and Sisters of Silence were ported over from Heresy. Rules updates were then carried out through the now familiar approach of big campaign series. Sanctus Reach, Black Crusade, and finally Gathering Storm all added new rules and new formations to existing factions. We also saw the introduction of prestige boxes and box games, as well as alternate starter sets. Army boxes like Stormclaw and Deathmask had rule books,
it makes sense when you start
armies,
making more and more money. You're able to expand out.
Shadow War, Armageddon, or Renegade.
And you could be able to make sets like this.
Games that many people just use to get cheaper models or terrain. Finally, towards the end of 7th edition, the Gathering Storm books pushed the story forwards for the first time in 30 years, giving us Primaris Marines, the return of Robert Guillermin, and the Cicatrix Maledictum, and paving the way for 8th edition. So this should be getting really familiar now. 8th edition was released in 2017. It was another complete rules set. This is the first time the rules were completely reset since 1998. The big starter set for 8th edition was Dark Imperium, containing a full hardback rulebook and 2 armies. Pretty big armies by anyone's count.
That's a lot.
Space Marines got a Primaris Captain, 2 Primaris Lieutenants, 1 Primaris Ancient, 2 5-mana Intercessor squads, a 3-man Inceptor squad, and a 5-man Hellblaster squad. And their enemies, the Death Guard, got a Lord of Contagion, a Noxious Blightbringer, the name started to go really silly around here, a Malignant Plaguecaster, 7 Plague Marines, 1 Bloat Drone, and 20 Death Guard Poxwalkers. But during this period, there were loads more starter kits and prestige boxes released. We're pretty much at now by this point. All the models are what is currently familiar. Many of the codices are still in use in 9th edition, but it's worth pointing out what was new in 8th edition. The first obvious new thing was the rules reset, which simplified and streamlined the core rules to better represent the breadth of models that now existed in the range. And because of this reset of rules, Games Workshop had to release a series of index books with data slates for all in-publication models so that you could use them.
Make them all compatible. Got it.
Index books, this was probably the most streamlined and easy to learn version of 40k since 3rd. 8th edition also formally introduced the 3 ways to play idea. These had always been kind
Narrative,
of
match, and
present,
open play.
but now open, narrative,
Oh,
and
that's
match
cool.
play were clearly defined. Of
That's
course,
cool.
match play instead of...
Oh, that's cool. So that means that I can do open play, and I don't have to worry about the elaborateness of the narrative of the narrative, or worry about the match play with the hardcore players. Basically, open play is more casual. That's great to know. So that means that I may not have to have such a large army. I can have a small army for a quick 30 minute match with somebody, and well, I guess it wouldn't be a 20 or 30 minute match like that. You know what I'm saying? But you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? Enough. There'll be enough to be able to do the whole thing.
Being tournament mode just immediately became seen as the default way to play, ruining the game for everybody else. The other two were largely ignored, and that kind of tied in with a bigger theme of 8th edition, which was that Games Workshop started to at least make a concession towards caring about competitive play. Jury's still out on how much. All the codexes were released in really quick succession over the next couple of years, and these codexes added things like stratagems and various seemingly quite complex faction special rules, and various campaign supplements were released which started to add on even more rules, and the familiar rules bloat started to emerge again, with the rules for a faction spread over multiple books, and hundreds of optional extras to combo up and break the game with, which then resulted in FAQs and so on and so on. All this continued into 9th edition, released in 2021, which is the year I'm making this, so this doesn't really feel like a history anymore. Anyway, mostly 9th edition was a slight rules update and a new set of starter boxes. The main addition to the game was that narrative was replaced by Crusade mode, a sort of structural campaign system where your army improves over time. Match play is still unfortunately the main way to play, but Crusade's got some traction. And there we are, 9 editions over 30 years.
Amazing.
As 40k goes from being a complex skirmish-level game played with metal soldiers, to a mass-market product aimed at tweens and teenagers, to an edgy, grim, dark shared universe, and with the most recent additions to being quite a self-aware part of a wider tabletop gaming ecosystem. The model range, the artwork...
Look at how it changed over the years. That's amazing.
...has changed constantly in that time, in response to marketing demands, or changing demographics in the player base, or the changing expectations of the wider gaming industry. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. Thanks for watching.
It's amazing. 9 editions across 30 years and how it changed and evolved over time. I noticed that Matt Ward's run was only 2 years. That's very telling, quite honestly. That's very interesting, quite honestly. I really like how the designers started off with fair enough highly complex rules, because it was the first edition. It's perfectly normal, in terms of game design, that happens with a lot of games, because remember, this is not like, say, like Chutes and Ladders, you know what I'm saying, where they work profusely on a board game, and then it goes right out the gate without the need of a second edition type of situation. You get what I'm saying? But when you have something as complex as a war game or Dungeons and Dragons and so on, Magic the Gathering, because it was the first of its kind type of thing, it's very difficult to really hash out all the rules on the first shot. It happens, you know what I'm saying? It's not like a video game, where everything's expected to be there right out the gate. And The fact that for 9 editions it grew, expand, refined, then simplified, then it simplified itself, to be more streamlined. It's a very amazing progress, and the addition of more factions within the races, um, as it kept growing, and codexes. And the supplementals weren't even around for 3 editions after third edition, which was pretty strange. Honestly, I would have thought that they would have kept going with the supplemental stuff during the course of the editions. I love that they made the previous editions backwards compatible. Now I don't know if they're no, because Arbitor Ian said that they had to create supplemental books in 8th edition, I believe, to line up the previous editions so that all the other models can be compatible. If I understood that correctly, let me know if I got that right. That 8th edition, those supplemental books were to get the previous editions up to date and line up and be compatible with 8th edition. What else did I like? I liked how they were transitioning parts. They start off with lead for some reason, pewter, cardboard, plastic. That's amazing that they tried so many different materials for the game. I still don't understand why they come in pieces and you gotta attach them and such. Is it because of the painting part? Since the painting is supposed to be part of the appeal of Warhammer, you paint, you clip off the pieces from you clip them off from their thing, then you paint you paint each individual piece separately, just so that way you could be able to get into the nooks and crannies. I'm assuming that has to be the reason why they come in pieces, so that painting will be easier. Like you have the arm. Here, perfect example. Right here with the orcs that I'm looking at. Instead of attaching them all together and then painting while they're fully attached, thus accidentally, splattering paint onto the arm. They're separated. They're separated so you could paint each individual part. And then you put them together into the figurine that we see there. Let me know if I got that right. Slanesh Noise Marine. What a name. I still gotta do the gods too. So this was a nice historical trip in terms of the game's design. From starting off as just a book in a D&D style to what we got today. I'm not liking the aesthetic look of these current editions. They feel corporate, as opposed to the early editions, which had aesthetics and thematics behind it. Like it really felt thematic and aesthetic, thematically aesthetic, or thematic and aesthetic, both. Now it just it looks corporate and sterile, in terms of the box art, the fonts and all that. It's the same issue I have with Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter's original logo really had a nice look to it. It was very iconic looking, very aesthetic. But then in Street Fighter 6, it's all sterile and corporate and with corporate font, and it just looks so weird and odd. Yeah. And like I said earlier in the video, I really would like to know if individual pieces are still being sold, individual package of individual, and how many would I need to how many of those would I need to buy in order to have the minimum. Because I'm not looking for a gigantic army of 20 creatures. Maybe one, since I love the orcs, I wouldn't mind having maybe I don't know. What do you think? 5 orcs, a war boss, and 1 mech. Would that be enough for for a casual open play? You know what I'm saying? Let me know. Let me know in the comments if that's good enough for to be able to do a nice skirmish. You know what I'm saying? To play a skirmish game. I wouldn't mind doing that if the investment is worth it too. You know what I'm saying? If it's not too costly, like $50. Just let me know. Let me know on that one because because again I still have my eyes on that in BattleTech. I just need the funds. And I would like to be able to show them off on the show here. So yeah, man, yeah. Man, definitely very good video from Arbiter Ian. This was how long ago? This was 3 years ago. Are they in 10th edition or not? Let me. Are they still on 9th edition or are they in 10th edition? Because this video was 3 years ago, so I'm assuming that either they're still on 9th edition or they moved over to 10th edition. I didn't take notice of that in the other videos because they're primarily lore videos. I'm listening to the story, not the game itself. Yeah. So let me know. Let me know. Let me know. Let me know everything. Quite honestly. All right. So. Head on over to Amazon.com and grab yourself a copy of The Impossible Man, a strange fantasy novel written by me. You'll find links to the book down in the description below, along with links to other merch such as pins, stickers, t-shirts, music. Enjoy the products. Thank you for your patronage. And if you have a copy of The Impossible Man and did a lore video on it, thank you very much. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it. And if you're interested, you can join me on my live multi-stream on Twitch and Kick on the evenings where I do lore research, Japanese cultural studies, gaming, and more. I look forward to hanging out with you. So, until the next round of Warhammer research, thank you all for joining me, and I wish you all a good night, a buenas noches, and oyasuminasai.